Miroslav, you took us back when you first began speaking to a way of reflecting on the life worth living that goes back at least 2,500 years, but I know it's your perspective because you shared it that actually the space for those kind of reflections is draining out of the culture. Tell us what you mean by that.
You know, each one of us in our private lives, on occasion when we happen to be quiet in the lull of a moment, would ask ourselves questions about where am I headed, what's happening with myself, what's happening with me and in my own life. But those moments are relatively rare. We are kind of immersed in the ordinary. We are immersed in the doing of things with a certain form of automatism. We're moving to certain ends, even though we haven't taken sufficient time to reflect on those ends. And we are all dependent on kind of spaces that are a little bit out of ordinary, in which we are called back to reflect about past of our lives as well as project ourselves into the future. And often in the culture, in the Western culture, universities have served this function at the very beginning stage of individuals' lives, or churches have served that function throughout the life of an individual. Other institutions might have done as well, but I think what we are witnessing today is a kind of shrinkage of spaces that provides us with the opportunity to ask the question and to answer it provisionally even for ourselves. What does it mean to lead our lives well, to live our lives well? Universities increasingly aren't about the meaning of life. We have seen this kind of development where universities tend to now ask the question of, well, what makes the universe tick? How is the universe made up? Kind of explanation of the universe is the question that's being asked, or the question that's being pursued is, how do we achieve certain ends that we have set for ourselves? We are nurturing so-called instrumental rationality, but we leave the ends, the goals, to each individual to decide for themselves, and yet in their own lives, there are only these occasional sporadic moments when this reflection can take place. And even when these moments come, if you haven't been nurtured in reflection, if you haven't been shown what the possible options are, what you might be able to choose, the kinds of lives that are available as possibilities, and how do you discern between them, you're left completely on your own devices. And increasingly, I think churches have a kind of, though they profess to talk about life worth living, good deal of what happens in churches, at least as I, as a theologian, amateur in the churches, as a visitor, observe, good deal of the church life is more, it's almost like a technical side of the question. Just like in universities emphasize instrumental rationality, so in the churches we emphasize kind of instrumental religion. How do the spiritual resources that are available, how do they make me get from point A to point B? How do I get enough energy? How do I get enough motivation? If I've fallen, how do I pick myself up and continue on that path? How do I get the kind of integrity of the self that will let me get there? But we don't ask the question, what's the end that I should choose? That kind of gets given to us by the culture, kind of osmosis of cultural environment in which we find ourselves. Often it's through advertisement, often it's through mass media, often it's through observation of those who are outside, who are our neighbors. Kind of competitive idea of I got to live as others live and somehow have what others have. It's all relatively knee-jerk and unreflected. And I think it's essential for us to have spaces in which we would be called back to carefully reflect on what makes our life worth living, what makes all these endeavors that we undertake every day whether that's working with kids at home or it's working at our businesses, what makes them add up to something larger than mere satisfaction of my inclinations and desires?